So guys, this is my first effort of giving you a revision lecture through the joys of YouTube. Hope it works for you. I'll try and do this every week, and then that way you can have some of the key messages that come out of each week, which you should be working on. So firstly, welcome to the course, Business Strategy. Key thing here, I think, is that there are going to be a strong focus on two parts of the course. The first one is the course book, that's the Grant and Jordan book, where essentially all chapters will be assessed either through that 30% online test, which takes place in week 10, multiple choice, 22 questions, all randomized, everyone will get different questions, but effectively you'll get questions from all chapters, and therefore knowing that book well will help you. And the way we're going to help you to do well is to give you weekly multiple choice tests during the tutorial time. So a really important part of your preparation is make sure you read the chapters that are indicated in the handbook, and then come along and do your best at the tutorial tests. And when you do well, that's great. That reassures you that you're going in the right direction. If you don't do so well, then clearly you'll then be given some of the answers, and that will hopefully prepare you better, but also tell you need to work a bit harder. All right, so good luck with that. Also, the Grant and Jordan book, which is the core book, is where we're taking all our lecture notes, and it's about 50% of the exam itself will be taken from material which is specifically covered in the Grant and Jordan book. So essentially, without it, you're going to struggle. Therefore, make a point of getting it from the library or buying it. If you do buy it, make sure you access the online web support, because I have a feeling that they have a bank of questions which will be very similar to the ones that would be coming up in your course quiz. Okay, so that's the first thing. Lots of hard work, but we're going to try and structure both the lectures and the tutorials in such a way that it focuses you on the core content and the assessment. Okay. So the second thing is that each week we'll be giving you articles to read, which are what we might call seminal articles. These are articles which are sort of leading edge and have changed the way that we think about strategy, much in the way that Sun Tzu changed the way that we thought about strategy when he developed his framework for it back in 1,000 years BC. So those articles are important because at least 50% of the exam paper will be based on one, two, or combinations of those articles. So reading them and preparing for them is a great idea. So the structure of the course then is going to be focused around reading the book, pre-reading chapters, doing an online a class test each week. It carries no marks, but it will help you to understand the sorts of questions that might be coming up in week 10, and then doing pre-readings of articles, discussing those articles and trying to understand how they relate to the core lecture material and how they help us to understand strategy better. And then the final part of the assessment, only worth 10%, so it's not something that you should spend a huge amount of effort on. You've already done case study analysis before in previous modules, so you'll be doing a case study analysis of one of 8 different case studies. So in tutorials, we'll spend some time looking at all the case studies, but clearly your task is to get yourself into groups and to be ready to look at one particular case study. As I think in week 7 or 8, you have to submit a presentation. And the presentation is going to be a PowerPoint presentation narrated. So effectively, you won't have to stand up and present it. We might do a rehearsal if you want, but effectively you'll be submitting a file, which is a PowerPoint presentation where you have a voiceover, and that voiceover must be one of the group. So we can't have a professional home tutor or whoever it is recording something for you and saving it so that you can submit it. It must be your own group, but it could just be one of them if you wish. All right, so that's the key thing. Lots of work to do, lots of reading to do. It is the final course of one of the world's best universities, so don't be surprised that there's academic work to do. But the structure of the teaching and learning sessions will mean that you get lots and lots of practice. Okay, so good luck with that. All right, so what should we say then about the actual content of the module in terms of the introduction? One of the things we've already realized is that the word strategy means different things to different people. If we take Sun Tzu, he probably never came up with the term strategy at all. But he realized that when it came to acting and behaving, then if you were going to engage in some form of battle, it was life or death, which means get it right. Yeah? Get it right and make sure everybody knows how to do it. And if you get it right and everybody knows how to do it, then your chances of success are very high. Really interestingly, if you look at Sun Tzu's concepts and notions of strategy, many of them are common sense things. Don't fight people who are bigger than yourself. Don't attack people where they're strong. Don't take on people who are more capable than you, because actually you must surely realize that that would be unsuccessful. Secondly, if you know what your own strengths are, then that enables you to fight your enemies or your competitors at their weakest points, rather with your strengths, rather than at their strongest points with potentially your weaknesses. This is common sense, of course, isn't it? But it's not necessarily how businesses do business. It's not necessarily how businesses develop strategies today. So it's worth having a look at that video that I posted up at the end of last week's lecture, because it sort of summarizes some of those key notions of strategy, which fit in very closely with actually Mintzberg's arguments about what strategy should be. And Mintzberg talks about strategy in terms of 5 different things. One of them, for example, is ploy. And if you remember, one of the ploys that Sun Tzu had when he went to battle with the bigger army of the Chu dynasty was he gave the impression that he was going to attack the capital. And in giving that impression, the general of the Chu army decided to retreat back to the capital to try to defend the capital. And in doing so, he was then trapped. So a ploy, for example, is a form of strategy that helps us to mislead our opposition and as a consequence, gain advantage. So throughout this course, we'll be looking at the sorts of skills, notions, capabilities that are required to result in successful outcomes. If you think back to your course, New Venture Development, there were patterns of behaviour that new ventures did, which were often successful. So things like open innovation is a pattern. It's a strategy, which is a pattern. And companies that followed the open innovation model, in many cases, were successful. So it is possible to identify good behaviours and good patterns which might lead to good strategy. So when Sun Tzu talked about strategy, he talked about know thyself, know thy enemy. He actually also said know thy terrain. If you know all 3, you have a chance of success. But if you don't know all 3, then you have very little chance of success. And that's something I think that is quite typical of traditional business today. We think about business in terms of doing an analysis of the environment and the marketplace and the conditions, the political, economic, social, technical, legislative, and environmental macro environment. We think about the 5 forces of market rivalry and buyer and supplier power, new entrants and substitutes. So these are all parts of the know thy enemy, know your environment, and this is repeated, I think, by Grant and Jordan, who talk about strategy as having 4 key components. Know your marketplace, know yourself, have a long-term vision, and make sure that you can put that plan into effect. Make sure you can actually implement that plan successfully. So in the very basic ways, strategy has not changed hugely over the last 2,000 years, but very cleverly, Sun Tzu used strategy to gain massive advantage, where in fact he didn't necessarily have massive resources. And one of the tasks I think for us all to look at over the next 10 weeks is how can we, in the case of our case studies, think about how could we better use their resources to deliver a better result. To what extent is the success of a company based on its resources? This is called the resource-based view. If a company is capable of doing something, why shouldn't it do it? Now, you might say because the market doesn't want it, but Apple is a great example of a company that made lots of products that nobody in the market appeared to want at the time, but in making them, then the market wanted them. And so we'll be looking at that sort of dynamic and that contradiction between companies that come up with great new ideas for markets that don't exist versus companies that produce fantastic sales satisfying existing markets. Right? Those two opposing views are the views that we'll be looking at in weeks 2 and 3. So between now and next week, you've got a few things to do. One of them is to read that Mintzberg article. It's a nicely written article in a sort of relatively journalistic way, so you'll find that easy to follow, and it's one that you can reference on many occasions. The second article is a Hambrick article, which is a bit more academic. And so what we're wanting you to do is try to work out in no more than a page, really, or a couple of slides, what are the basic concepts or arguments that are being discussed in each of those two articles, and bring those ideas along so that we can discuss them in our tutorial. Please make sure that you've read chapter 1 at the very least for Grant and Jordan, because there'll be a multiple choice quiz taking place in the next tutorial, and we'll just see how well you've picked up those basic ideas. Finally, try and get yourself into a group of people that you like, or people that you can work with, so that we can start working on the case studies by the end of next week. Right? I hope you've enjoyed the first week. I hope this video will be helpful in helping you and reminding you a little bit about what we cover each week. Obviously, read the lectures again, make notes during the lectures. It's always a good idea. Come to the tutorials because they're very focused on the assessments. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask myself or Abra, who will be helping you during the course. Later in the term, we've got Professor Ignacio Canales who's coming over. In fact, one of the papers that we've asked you to read later in the term is one of his papers. It's a 4-star paper, which is the highest ranked paper in the world. So he really is top flight. He's got some great ideas and he's a lovely guy. I hope you enjoy working with him. In the meantime, have a great weekend and speak to you next week.